Welcome to BrandBusters with your hosts, James Schwinn and Sean Lee. Together, we bust open the latest in CPG, retail media, and life, or whatever the we want. And for today's episode, we got something special cooked up for ya. Extra spicy. Take it away, Sean.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 18 of the BrandBusters. And we have a great show today with Matt Mullenax, who's the co-founder and CEO of Huron. For those that don't know, Huron's a rapidly growing men's care brand that offers products with high-quality ingredients in absolutely amazing scents. Matt attended Brown University, which seems to be a trend, another Ivy Leaguer on the podcast, and got his MBA at Stanford. He has a background in investment banking, and he previously worked at Bonobos, the e-commerce and D2C darling of the 2010s. So really pumped to have you on the show, Matt, and excited to kind of dig in and ask some questions and learn from your experience.
Yeah, so, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, I mean, we'll kind of jump in and just say one thing that I've seen across our interviews, we just had one yesterday, is a pattern of CPG founders that have Ivy League backgrounds. You have an awesome and impressive resume, obviously the investment banking piece, working at Bonobos. What is it that seems to, one, draw Ivy Leaguers to jump into this crazy game of consumer packaged goods? And then two, what specifically drew you to the industry and why did you launch Huron?
Yeah, both good questions. I don't know if there's a direct correlation between Ivy League and CPG. You think it'd be inversely related because in the startup world, it's maybe not the most lucrative at the start, but it is kind of funny to see how many folks with similar backgrounds who are operating in today's CPG sphere. What drew me to Huron? So as you alluded to, after graduation, I worked in investment banking. It was 2008 investment banking, so it wasn't exactly the high days of high finance, if you will. Yeah. After about 6 months on the job, I got a little fatigued of Google imaging major private equity firms' logo and slapping them on PowerPoint presentations. So I started kind of toe the waters and see what else was out there. Ended up getting introduced to the team at Bonobos, which is super small at the time. So when I joined, I was 6, I think. Oh, wow. We were operating out of a small basically studio apartment in Chelsea. So it was very kind of early stage boots on the ground, which was a super cool experience. And that kind of gave me a little intro taste to what would become the D2C landscape. Yeah. I think all the acronyms came many, many years later, but in the mouthful of marbles description, we were a e-commerce brand that sold brightly colored pants, right? So not exactly the quippy tagline, but was a really interesting experience for me. I got to learn a ton from Andy and Brian, the co-founders, who both had consulting, then private equity, then Stanford MBA backgrounds. And I think for me, kind of very junior in my career, I was like, that's an amazing background. I'm like, that's what I want to do. So after a few years at Bonobos, I got back on the finance track, so to speak, moved to Chicago, went back into banking for a few years, went into private equity, investing in early stage consumer brands. So got to see kind of more of the breadth, not the depth of the landscape. Then went back to business school and then started to think about ultimately what I wanted to do after. And I think for me, why CPG and in particular personal care was super compelling was I was the consumer, right? I was a kid that grew up with bad skin, constantly, walking the aisles of CVS and Walgreens, Googling or finding on Amazon whatever GQ listicle would put out for like best new skincare products, and never really having success. And ultimately, before I started at Stanford, I just said to myself, like, I'm going to figure this out. So I started researching a bunch of products and ultimately found a brand that I found the products to be effective, but I found the price points to be offensive. So always the journey was, how do you kind of channel the former of super clean ingredients, great performing products, but maybe a tone of voice, a brand, a presence that resonated a little bit more with the me's of the world, the kids in the Cincinnati's, the Columbuses, the Chicagos of the world. So that was kind of the original mission, and got working on that kind of the tail end of business school and launched shortly thereafter.
That's awesome. I mean, from your early days at Bonobos, were they funded by Forerunner Ventures? Was that one of their early investors early on?
Yep, that's exactly right.
They seem to be the heyday of D2C funding and had some good exits. But from your time at Bonobos, your time at Stanford, and all the connections that you made in the space, how helpful, if at all, was that launching Huron and diving into the startup CPG world and men's grooming space?
Super helpful. I think from a number of perspectives. One, it gave me a taste for what the fundraising cycle was like, how beneficial it can be, how tough it might be, despite how quickly growing you might be as a company or how many tailwinds you have. Fundraising stuff. It also taught me a ton about really prioritizing the consumer. I think Andy was big on the Zappos model around like truly going above and beyond for the consumer. So, diving into this category, we were operating in what is a little bit of an awkward space, right? Like no one wants to talk about BO or breakouts or things like that. So how do we make it relatable, personable, and how can we be a little bit of an authoritative figure in the space, kind of given my co-founder Matt's background, which we can dive into. But I think that angle from a consumer first perspective, whether it was hand delivering New York City orders during COVID or just kind of doing things a little bit above and beyond the call of duty to hopefully strike meaningful relationships with our first subset of customers was something that I definitely prioritized.
That's awesome. Yeah. Any advice that you have for anybody that's listening that may be working for a smaller consumer goods brand or that's thinking about fundraising? I know, at least from my experience, you have people that like to fund companies that may be in the software space or that don't carry inventory. Obviously, consumer goods is a completely different beast because you have to invest in consumer acquisition. And then as you grow, you have to put more cash into inventory. It's just a slightly different model. Any advice that you would have either in normal times, and then now I know it's obviously more challenging because the pendulum has swung back and CPG is not quite as in favor as some of the others from a VC perspective. But any advice that you have, having gone through it, or for people that are going through it today?
Yeah, raising money for widget companies is tough. Everyone wants to be in the SaaS landscape where your gross margins are effectively 100%. But turns out when you make widgets, you operate at a slightly lower margin. I think there's two prevailing tracks. One is you try and go kind of like the high flying VC route where you're very concerned with the logos on your partner page. There's another track, which is a little bit more of our ilk, which is who has previously built companies in and around our category, and can we strike engagements with them, strike up conversations, get to know these folks, and maybe there's a chance for them to participate. So, for instance, Andy from Bonobos was one of our earliest investors. Peter Rahal and Jared Smith, who are the co-founders of RX Bar, were two of our earliest checks. So it's interesting because not only do you get some of their expertise and experience, but now there's capital on the line, right? So it's those folks are a little bit more engaged. And I think finding folks who are 1 to 2 chapters ahead of you, or in RX Bar and Bonobos case, like many novels ahead of where we started, learning from what has worked, but maybe more importantly, what didn't. So avoiding costly missteps, because much of this journey, meaning the startup journey, is about learning how to say no and when to say it. So understanding what is core to what you're building, what is noise, and kind of taking some of those learnings from folks, again, who might be a little bit further in their journey to figure out what's applicable to you and your business today.
I think that's great advice too, especially with them having domain expertise and having done it before. Like they get it, they get the model, they understand, the challenges, the growth opportunities, and they're not giving, irrelevant feedback, which is usually like just grow sales and marketing and grow the business. So that I think that's great advice.
Which was the advice for many, many years, right? It was just like, wait, there's a line item beneath net sales. Interesting. And I think the tenor has certainly shifted. And now who's being rewarded from the fundraising landscape is folks who are infrastructurally building businesses, not high growth brands. And I think that truly is a distinction where, as late as 2018, 2019, brands were getting funded, but there were no underlying businesses to a lot of those brands. Now, I think what people want to see is, hey, if I acquire this business, like what is the cash that's going to be coming my way versus are we just going to be funding these losses for a certain period of time, hoping that this business or brand turns the profitability corner?
Yeah, I think there's an adage: you start a business by saying yes, you scale a business by saying no, and kind of having that appetite for nuisance revenue. What was some of the most, I think it's a mixed bag from other founders we've talked to when fundraising, but what was some of the most helpful feedback that you heard, whether it was someone that actually invested or someone that passed, but they gave you actionable feedback that you applied to Huron?
It's a really good question. Peter from RX bar, who's actually launching a new product called David, I think like next week, which is a protein bar. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. If there's anyone who knows protein bars, it's probably Peter Rahal.
Yeah.
He was very adamant on me finding the niche, however you want to pronounce it, the nichest of niche consumer pockets, right? And like truly owning this like unique corner of the internet or the consumer world. I think out of the gates, we tried to be a little everything to everyone. And what that did is it just put our learnings on a longer time horizon, quite frankly. And now we're in a stage where we know exactly why people come to Huron and exactly why people come back. So as we think about marketing, as we think about tagline creation, web development, product development, it's with kind of like those two core principles under our belts, which people love the performance of the products and love the scent. So it's like, what are the auxiliary products? What's kind of like the breadth of the line, or conversely, what's the depth of the line? If you love this particular scent, how many different ways can we deliver that to you on a day-to-day basis? And I think that took maybe a little longer than we had hoped, but ultimately we got there. But that was something that Peter was really, really passionate about, because when he had started RX Bar, it was truly a bar for the CrossFit market, right? And that was kind of an untapped, again, corner of the consumer world. And they dove in headfirst, and obviously had a ton of success in doing so.
That's great. I mean, obviously you guys are very consumer focused. Your co-founder, Matt, I think he's a master scent profiler, a master formulator, with big company experience. How, in the early days, how did you go through that trial and error to figure out what is the right product set? What are consumers responding to? How did you do the early consumer research to know what scents they liked and what type of products to offer?
Yeah, great question. I think from a assortment standpoint, we knew we wanted to come to market with what we considered the best basics. So we wanted to have a body wash, and then we wanted to dabble a little bit in skincare, just kind of given my own personal background. So we launched with body wash, face moisturizer, which was called face lotion at the time. Matt is brilliant from a product development, product storytelling, scent perspective. And what I didn't realize until much later in the journey is what his expertise and experience in the category does from a experience relationship standpoint with a lot of these contract manufacturers or fragrance houses. Typically, how it might work if, Sean and James want to launch a deodorant, you Google a fragrance house and then they send you like 10 samples and they're like, pick the 2 that you like. And that's your fragrance. That's not really how we play ball, which is nice. So, our first fragrance, I'm trying to remember, like we were on iteration probably like in the 50s. And Matt is such a well-known entity in the category. His ability to dissect fragrance is insane. And I think a lot of these, decade-long relationships with a lot of these fragrance houses allowed us to command that attention, versus otherwise, we're a rounding error at that point to a lot of these fragrance houses. So
their stock scents and
exactly. So the ability to not play by the rules, I think, really created this unique tailwind kind of from the get-go, that really allowed us kind of scale product in a way that, a lot of people say like, soap is soap. But really putting something truly better, we believed different and better in front of them, just knowing that, Matt's built fragrances for the Tom Fords of the world and built products for Lab Series. And, someone who's accustomed to buying Dove for Men, like isn't used to using that sort of product quality. And I think that's what we were presenting out of the gates.
Yeah, that's great. Even from I managed Old Spice for P&G for a few years, and obviously such a scent-driven brand. They're not quite on the level of your scents, but our philosophy was the performance is going to be the same. So we're never going to make performance claims. Let's just make scent claims. Obviously it's a lower tier in mass market kind of product, but that's what built the entire brand, was purely scent profiles. And you guys, I think, a testament to the quality and care that you put into them. Like, it's great to kind of build a brand behind unique and proprietary scent profiles, especially with Matt's background. You can
totally
build pretty big brands just based on scent alone.
Yeah. And I think, scent is something that's like very much in the zeitgeist right now. There's a lot of brands coming out with scent. Like I think Esquire actually launched their own line of fragrances, which is pretty nuts. But I think people are drawn to the fact that typically this is a very margin friendly product. And people are both intrigued and captivated by scent. Like, right. It is I like the way I smell. I will buy this. And I think especially for the male consumer, I think this is one product in the bathroom, let's call it, where there is a willingness to spend. Yeah. But the value prop has to be there, right? So I think our ability to say like, hey, this fragrance was built by the same team, the same developer, the same nose that developed these fragrances up here, but now we're developing and delivering a very similar product at a third of the price point. I think that's a really compelling story to tell.
Yeah. Do you guys? Sorry, James. I just had one follow-up, but
go for it.
When we talk to the CEO of Clean Age, they make deodorants, body washes, things like that for mass market. One of the trends that she was seeing with Gen Z was that people are picking different scents for different days of the week, or they're wearing multiple scents. Are you guys seeing that trend with your consumers or younger consumers, where they may not just have one scent that's their scent, they may buy multiples or be wearing different scents on different days?
Yeah, great question. Don't know the level of granularity around the last point, around different days, but what I've seen that's really, really compelling, and again, like definitely bucked the trend, or at least my initial hypothesis, is people buying multiple fragrances at once and not returning them.
Yeah.
So
they got to be using them multiple days a week or at different occasions.
I think that then allows us to think about unique ways to bundle, assort merchandise of like buy 2, save X, buy 3, save Y. And I didn't think we had that knowledge or level of intel beforehand to feel like that could be a successful funnel for us to dive into, but pretty convinced now that could be a really interesting next step for us.
Yeah. I mean, we thought it was really interesting when she said it, because like my time on Old Spice, and then just, I think generationally, you had people that they've worn the same cologne their entire life. It's whatever they got gifted in high school. They pick their deodorant and they kind of wear that for the rest of their lives. So it's really interesting to see Gen Z and millennial trends flipping to be more scent switchers than, I wear Polo cologne from the time I got it at 20 until I'm 80 years old. So I think that's a super interesting thing. James, I'll let you dive in since I
sure. No, I've got a couple that are all laced together here. So I think going back to the topic of formulations, I think we see this trend with D2C brands really focusing on like educating and entertainment. So edutainment, if you will. I think Dr. Squatch shined a light on some of the ingredients that are used in like a Dove or whatever else. It's like, don't wash your body with like dish soap or whatever else, I think from the video. What are some ingredients that consumers should be wary of, and maybe some everyday essentials which should maybe consider more of like a premium option like Huron into their daily regimen?
Great question. I mean, I think like the biggest no-no that's probably on people's radar, or at least they're familiar with, is the use of aluminum or lack thereof, right? So when we talk about the difference between an antiperspirant or a deodorant, antiperspirant obviously contains aluminum. It's truly like clogging your pores versus a deodorant, which is simply reducing odor-causing bacteria or trying to eliminate, but it's not going to clog the pores or help prevent sweat necessarily. So I think Native and Moist did a great job of kind of like educating the category there. They were probably one of the first brands on the scene to really kind of take and own that category. So I think people are coming around to that notion, right? Our no-no list, we manufacture without silicones. Now, not all silicones are bad necessarily, but we just took a line in the sand and said, hey, rather than like try and toe the water here, we're just going to manufacture without. And I think as we think about broader price points and how our retails compare, I mean, our free of list is quite extensive, less one or two things, one being fragrance. We're basically Sephora clean. So as we kind of stack up against the broader men's category, our formulations are like very, very clean. And we did that intentionally, knowing that that's kind of where the industry is trending. Yeah. So rather than manufacture and come up with products and formulations that we love and grow attached to, and then 3 years later be like, holy cow, we got to like pull this chassis all together because we need to reformulate. What does that do from the perception from the end consumer standpoint? So, silicones, phthalates, parabens, all of those things have been outside of the ingredient list really from the start. And I think that's a combination of what consumers are reading in the industry news, but also kind of what's happening in the broader beauty space, largely targeting the female consumer, as she's much more educated and conscious of a lot of these ingredient callouts and what's in her products.
Yeah. And from that trend standpoint, I feel like until maybe the last decade or 7 years, there really hasn't been much innovation in men's regimens. You have your shampoo, maybe conditioner, guys typically opting for like the Suave 2-in-1 or 3-in-1 in some instances, which, some women might claim is barbaric. We would use something all in. is it because millennials are aging and now coming into different issues and we want like products that serve these issues? What do you feel like has led to all this innovation, these brands sprouting up in the men's kind of personal care space the last, several years?
Yeah, great question. I think men's as a subset within beauty is kind of like the last domino to fall, if you will, right? I like to joke if the last time you've switched your body wash brand was, when you're wearing cargo shorts and like a shell necklace, then like that's telling in itself. Like, what else have you been using for the past 15 or 20 years? Like the list is not long. So I think presenting folks with, valuable alternatives, right? Like a lot of people might view this customer as cheap, but we view them as like value centric, and you have to pitch like what the value is into spending $3 to $5 more on body wash. It's like, well, what am I getting in return? Well, you're getting a formula that's 30% more concentrated. You're getting a formula that doesn't use potentially these harmful ingredients. You're getting a formula that has luxury level cologne scent profiles in a body wash. So I think like those are just angles that we need to storytell and communicate as to why this is a better product. But as we think about kind of like the male consumer, like I think there's just a lot of folks going after this particular archetype because the female consumer has a litany of options, right? Across hair, body, makeup, et cetera. And I think, again, for men outside of the pure play mass world, there's just a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, my personal experience with Huron, I've been an active customer for probably 2 years. So actually, first product I bought from you all was the eye stick, which I have right here. I'm a dad of 2 boys, and I never thought I'd buy like an eye stick or eye roller, but then I noticed I started having like, you have sleepless nights, like all of a sudden you have bags under your eyes. I'm like, what is happening right now? So it was kind of vulnerable. I'm like, am I really going to research this? Found you guys, bought it, and then I ended up going in, like, surely enough, like now I've got the shampoo and then the conditioner and the body wash. So like it compounds. Like I haven't gotten to the scents yet, but I think you guys developed a nice line in terms of addressing maybe some of the more like vulnerable needs of like male consumers. And then they have a great experience with the product, and then they want to expand and are willing to pay, $3 to $5 more, and have kind of one go-to brand or product on it. So at least my personal use case, no questions there, just kind of giving you my example with you guys.
No, James, we appreciate the support. And I think you laid out a really nice use case for us, which is once you kind of like see the value or like the brand or enjoy the products, guys will go all in, right? It's the reason why True Classic exists, because who else is going to buy 12 t-shirts at a time, right? It's like, oh, I like the fit of this t-shirt. I want it in every single color, or I just want 12 white of them, 12.
I've done the same thing with Built Basics. It's like, I liked one fit and I bought like the shirt in every color, and 100%. Now I buy pants and everything else.
It's like, great, I found my one thing for this particular need. I'm stocking up for a year. We joked internally, like, do we sell a decade's worth of body wash and just like super discount it? Because like that caters to that mentality a little bit. So, no, it's a really interesting story. So we appreciate the support, James.
That's awesome. I know. So you guys have been around for 6 years. Obviously, there's been probably a lot of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 evolutions of the brand and how you go to market. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned starting as a true like direct-to-consumer brand on a Shopify site, then venturing into Amazon, and then starting to venture into other channels, be it kind of smaller wholesale channels or trying to go retail in the future? Like any big things that you learned that would be helpful for people to know, or things you would have wished you had learned quicker or done differently?
Yeah. Yes to all. A bunch of thoughts.
Very broad.
I think one of the biggest learnings for me is to poke holes in your own hypotheses frequently and violently. I think for a long time we would make just judgment calls and say like this doesn't seem to be working, therefore blanket statement. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I think where you get a little bit into trouble is if you have a small team, we're a team of 4, resource allocation just becomes something to handle, right? So if signs of an early test aren't promising, you're kind of quick to pull the plug because you're like, this isn't going to work because we have 75 other things to be working on. Yeah. And a great example for us is subscription. 2 or 3 years ago, I had a hunch that consumers and guys in particular just had subscription fatigue. You subscribe to Netflix, you're an Amazon Prime member. But recently, we've seen our subscription business explode. And I think how that eventually occurred was, one, admitting we were incorrect, but two was, how do you structure a subscription program that provides a ton of value to the customer, not to the business? Yeah. And I think when you think like that, there was just a ton of opportunities to like, well, why don't we do this? Or like, how about that? Or make this more prominent. And we've seen our opt-in rates triple in the past 6 weeks, which is like super compelling. So I think being not so quick to write things off, and what that boils down to is like, come to the table with a perspective, but be your own harshest critic in terms of like poking holes in that narrative or in that hypothesis. So that's definitely been one thing. Two, I think staying true to the brand. From an early investor, he was very adamant that we go through the brand creation process with one of the big New York agencies, right? Which we did. And I would say that we had a good experience, and I'm excited about the end result, from the name to the color scheme, et cetera. We paid a lot of money for that. Yeah. And what we ultimately did 6 weeks after launch is we rebuilt the entire website, and I flew in 5 buddies from undergrad and 5 buddies from grad school and got some guys local in New York. And we sat in a WeWork and drank way too much beer and ate way too much pizza and just whiteboarded, like, how do you talk about face wash? How do you talk about body wash? What's punny in this world? How do we think about landing on the site? And that to me was probably 100x more valuable from a takeaways and learnings perspective than maybe going through the agency process. We grew up in an era where you had to be associated with one of these agencies almost coming out of the gates to be successful. And that's just not the case. For every award-winning X brand that comes out of those agencies, there's probably 5 in the graveyard that no one ever talks about. And it kind of took some learnings to eventually get there, but that was certainly a learning. And then lastly, I would say, there's a lot of talk around acquisition hurdles and, Meta being super jumpy and being super reliant on paid channels. I'm a huge fan of Preston, the co-founder of Chubby's. He's become a buddy, friend of a friend. I think what he puts out content-wise on LinkedIn is like so sharp and literally genius, and his push around brand marketing. And I think that was a huge wake-up call for me to be like, what are the SMSs that are currently being set out in flows? And like, when's the last time like I actually reviewed those? Because oftentimes, the voice is kind of me speaking to me 10 years ago. Like, so does it resonate with me? So consistently building in kind of heat check opportunities to say, like, is this still on brand? Like, maybe this was on brand in 2020, but does this still work in 2024? And I think having some of that internal reflection to kind of go through and say, hey, voice is free, right? Like, there's a lot of things in marketing that are not free. Voice, tonality, how you show up, like all that is free. So auditing that more regularly is something that I was not doing. And now we're doing pretty frequently and seeing the results because of it.
Yeah, no, I think those are really great points. I mean, they're kind of tried and true and in some respects common sense, which is, one, the consumer's boss, right? So like, as you're thinking about a subscription program, like, what do they want and how are they going to find value? Like, always think about like, what's the consumer want and how can you solve a pain point or deliver value to them? I mean, it sounds easy, but if it was, everybody would do it. I think the second piece is, when I founded the Zevo brand, I was in P&G Ventures. We'd done the same thing. We hired a big New York agency, launched a website, ended up redoing it like a month later. And it was just me and 4 people on a whiteboard we locked ourselves in a room for 3 or 4 days. And the flow, the pitch, the emails that we came out of that were so much better than, the initial take at it. So I think for any founder out there, the insights and the business probably better than everybody else. The voice, like, just do the work, even if it's painful, and lock yourself in a room for a week or 2. The outcome's probably going to be 10 times better, and you'll spend way less money than outsourcing it to somebody who doesn't care as much about the brand, which I think is great. And I think the final piece too on that is, you really just have to get back to like always staying on brand, always staying on equity, keep your tone of voice. It's very easy when other people get involved or other agencies get involved. They want to put their stamp on it. They get bored with it. Like, the consumer doesn't get as bored with it as you do because you think about it every day. And it's very easy to start deviating from your original brand or your original tone just because you're bored. So I think all really, really great advice. Kind of following up on that, is there any, you had referenced Meta and a lot of the challenges that are out there. Is there any channel that you think over the next 2-3 years will be kind of the best emerging channel? Obviously, hard to always predict the future, but anything that's getting you really excited?
I'm really encouraged by TikTok, honestly. I know it's probably a hot button subject, but in my mind, there's way too much smart money that's invested in TikTok for it to just all of a sudden fade away in 3, 6, 9 months. Like, that's not going to disappear without a fight.
No.
And what's really interesting about that channel from a brand standpoint is the uglier, the better. And people love stories. So I am not a content creator. I am not great at it. It's not my favorite thing to do. But you quickly realized how much people gravitate towards storytelling and wanting to know what's underneath the hood. I have a hypothesis that, for every entrepreneur out there, there's probably 5 folks that would love to do something entrepreneurially, but won't for whatever reason. Maybe it's not the right time in life. Maybe they can't support it financially, like whatever the reason. So why not give those folks unfettered access, like to a behind the scenes of like what it's like to be 5 years into growing a men's personal care brand. And the more we can show and actually be faces and people, like actually building things, then I think there's just so much more gravitational pull towards the brand. And it costs nothing, right? So we've seen a direct impact of just posting once a day what the results do for us on TikTok shops, right? Because the first thing people do is they'll click on your profile and say like, hey, is this some drop shipper from God knows where across the globe? Or is like this a brand with like real people who seemingly do things that I do? And it's actually pretty relatable. And that's enough in a very crowded market and very crowded category who's all fighting for a share of wallet to say, yeah, I'm willing to try this brand out. So it's maybe not the most different or sexiest answer, but I'm actually pretty bullish on the platform, just given what it can do for branded brands and those who are willing to kind of put themselves out on the platform.
Yeah, we talked to the founder of Cheers, Brooks Powell, and kind of talked about a similar theme of this like celebrification of founders, and how it kind of creates, he who also admittedly wasn't a regular creator type to leaning into that. And after like you have 2-3 good weeks, you're like, shit, what do I post about now? So just like, all right, well, here's how we're setting up our weeks. Here's us building a booth for a trade show, and like just giving that like kind of lifting the veil behind the scenes. One, makes you more accessible, I think, to the consumers as well, which I think maybe the sad nature is we're all yearning for that like connection, and it feels like a connection by proxy to the brand and your identity a little bit. So I guess it sounds like you're doing that right now, but any other plans that haven't been unveiled yet to continue to kind of give your users and customers exposure to you and kind of the behind the scenes look?
Yeah, the way we kind of like thought about the content strategy is just figuring out, what has been an emergent archetype within the customer file that like seems to resonate for whatever reason. One of the things we're learning is it's like runners and folks who are outdoors focused and active. And then secondly, it's kind of like, is there any overlap where you feel confident in creating content consistently? Because consistency is of like the 10 C's I just listed. Like that's probably the most important for the platform. So for me, it was really interesting because like I run every morning. So, I'm all Olympic records are safe when I'm outside. But it's something that I can at least do regularly to say like, okay, here's the training plan. And then I fed my son breakfast and then we did it. So it's just something to feed the platform. So not to say that Huron will be like a run talk page anytime soon, but maybe every 3rd or 4th post could be like, here's another morning, like, to Brooks's point, like we're getting the day set and then we do this. And like, here's a cool new brand that I discovered in like the electrolyte world, things like that, where it's like, okay, this all kind of operates within a few degrees of separation from kind of like this core archetype that we're kind of delivering content towards. So I think we'll continue on that path, but kind of understanding like, where is content creation the easiest because it feels the most natural? And then how does that resonate with kind of like the audience that you're trying to target?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know you mentioned running. You post stuff about running on Twitter. You post stuff about running on your TikTok page. Is there any lessons you learned from being a prior athlete or from running that either kind of helps your kind of mental health or just lessons that you can apply to the business on a daily basis. How do those things interact? Because we see a lot of former athletes. I think James and I both lift weights. We both run. You see a lot of business people that do physical pursuits. How does that work for you? And how is that an outlet, and how has it impacted the business?
I think for me, to your last point, it's exactly that. It's just a natural outlet, right? Like I will go for a run and think about 10 million things other than running, which is like a really great kind of like safe place, just to go escape for an hour, to think about work, to think about life, to think about whatever. It just creates like a little bit of like a natural vent or a natural outlet of sorts. And I think for me, I mean, growing up as an athlete, like I always had working out and fitness as a part of the day-to-day routine. And I think removing that from the schedule actually makes me 10x more miserable to be around. So, it's not only for me, it's probably for everyone else's sake as well.
As my wife would say that about me. She's like, if I don't do it, she's like, even if it's inconvenient, just go do it, because I don't want to deal with you the rest of the day.
100%. So look, I think it's really great. Like it's such a stimulus for me in the morning. I can feel dialed in. I thrive with routine. So it's like, I try and get up the same time every single day, try and go for a run every single morning, do a little bit of work beforehand. It just, I ate the same thing for school lunch from the time I was a first day of school in 7th grade until I graduated high school, right? It's just like one of those weird routine driven folks. So it's just the safe comfort zone that I operate within. And it makes me feel great.
That's great. I think we're probably close to time here. Is there any advice or parting thoughts that you would give the audience on kind of building a brand or growing in the e-commerce and Amazon space?
Parting advice. No, I mean, I think a lot of folks kind of throw their hat into the proverbial ring because they've experienced some sort of friction, or, they wanted to be the consumer of something, but something did not exist. So, at the end of the day, when you are your own customer and consumer, it just gives you so many rites of passage to say, around tweaking brand marketing, around understanding end consumer, and ultimately having a passion for what you do. Like we are, 5 years in market, but probably on the journey for 6 years. It feels like I haven't worked in 6 years, if I'm being totally honest, right? Like I love what I do. I love the work that we're doing. I love the intellectual curiosity. I love the challenges. And I think for me, I never had the perspective of, wow, I could do so many things after this, having operated a business, because you touch everything. You touch CX, you touch supply chain, you touch D2C, you touch Amazon, you touch marketing, you touch product development. Exactly. And I think rarely in life do you get exposed to so many verticals so quickly, and you just got to figure it out, because if you don't, then the business doesn't survive. Right. So I think kind of being your own consumer, like taking a step back every once in a while to acknowledge that, is really, really important and really, really healthy, and just allows you to kind of repel out and see things a little bit more clearly from a 30,000 foot vantage point.
It's awesome. Well, Matt, we really appreciate you taking the time. I think the audience is really going to love the conversation, is going to learn a lot from it. So like we do at the end of every episode, please follow Matt on X or Twitter, whatever we call it nowadays. Friend us or follow us on LinkedIn, and then go to Huron's website and give them a try. I think you'll love the sense. Appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.